I want to start out this video by saying thank you to Mr. Rotary SMP for sending a bunch of you my way. If you're not watching his channel, check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. It's pretty amazing to me that thousands of you from around the world get to share my little shop with me. But even with modern technology, sometimes you guys still get in my way. Moving the tripod around has gotten to be a constant hassle, and I've seen a bunch of different solutions people use for this. But I think with the layout of my shop, what I want to do is mount a giant balanced arm on the wall here. You know the sort of thing I mean, one of these with the linkages and the springs. Just make it bigger and put a camera on it. It's about 7 feet from the wall to the shaper. That might be a little ambitious, but I can always make it shorter later. I've got 24 feet of 3/4 inch aluminum tubing left over from another project. That should be more than enough. So when I dropped the table down to put the reamer in, the other end hit on the lathe. Now I can drop a shoulder bolt in here to keep this end aligned while I do the other end, which is just the same sequence over again, so I'm not going to show you. I'm going to mark these things so that in the future, if they get mixed up, I know which ones go together as a set. And now that I've got all these ready to go, I need to make some brackets to hold them all together. I think I want to cast these. I've done some casting before on the channel. It usually doesn't go very well. So really this project is just an excuse to try to step up my casting game. The first thing I need to do is upgrade my Foundry furnace from the pile of old bricks in my driveway. I decided to line the new one with insulating fire brick. It seems like the best compromise between efficiency and durability, but you really don't want to breathe the dust from it. So I'm wearing a respirator and I drug the bandsaw outside just so I don't fill the shop with this dust. I'm using an old spray foam tank for this. It's about the same size as a propane tank, but safer to cut up, and it's what I had. The fire brick still needs a high temperature coating on it, so I'm using some Satanite. First on the bottom, then the sides. For the lid, I decided to go with ceramic wool. So I welded on some studs, made some little round nuts that go on, and then that all gets a good coat of Satanite too. Once the Satanite dries a little bit, it gets fired to cure it, and then repeat the process about 3 times. The burner for this thing is based on the Ron Reel design, pretty standard for this sort of thing. I did do the MIG Welder tip Venturi modification. I drew up the patterns in CAD and then let the CNC router do most of the work for it. And then it's just paint, fill, sand, repeat. A bunch more sanding and a bunch more painting later, and these are ready to go. I kept these pretty simple. Did 5 degrees of draft on them instead of the normal 3. Basically just trying to set myself up for success. These are all pretty simple patterns. The only one that's A split pattern is this one. That's tight. There we go. These are all just one piece. I think I'm just going to do one flask for right now, do these one at a time, see how it goes, and see what I learned in the process. I spent some time working on my sand mix. I think I've got it pretty good now. So I think I'm ready to start ramming up some molds and then dumping them out again. Well, I guess I'm not going to have trouble getting that pattern out. You know, that thing fell out before, and this time it split out a little bit. This surface is going to end up getting machined, so I'm not too worried about that. That's not too bad. I think I'm going to go with that. On the next one, I'm going to try to ram up a little better around some of these edges, get it packed in a little more. I've got a lot of thin material and then a lot of thick material right in the middle here. I'm going to try to gate this so it feeds into the thickest pieces. Where I cut the sprue and the well was just too close to the edge, and it just ran out the side, so the runner kind of dried up. Got some pretty gnarly shrinkage going on here because the runner wasn't full, but I think these parts are still going to be usable. It'll actually save me some grinding off all those gates. A little closer to the final shape anyway. This is just part of the learning process, and we'll just try to make the next one a little bit better. Round 2 left a good bit more space around everything. Was much more aggressive ramming it up, and to save some sand from doing the first one, I made a smaller cope. And to keep these nice and tight together, that pour went better in terms of getting it to fill in, but I ended up with a couple little spots where I had some sand wash. This one's pretty bad. This is where some sand got knocked loose or was loose in the mold and got washed down into it. Left some pretty bad defects. So putting these in the drag so that the aluminum is flowing down into them, that's a risk of that. Doing it that way saved me on these first two, bit me on that one. I think I'm going to call this one good enough. That's not going to affect how this works. This one I'm going to redo because I need to do this other piece still. So I'm going to try doing this one in the cope this time. So I'll set that aside for now. This time I'm making sure that all of these edges are kind of rounded out a little bit so the sand won't break out as much. Make sure there's no loose sand in there. Try to keep the sand where it's supposed to be. That worked about well enough. Still got some sand wash here in the drag, right under the gate. A lot of this is going to get machined out anyway, so I'm going to call that good enough. I'm going to get these cleaned up a little more and start machining. I didn't totally clean that up, but that should be good enough to screw onto the wall. I centered this hole mostly by eye. These holes are very carefully located to be just far enough out that the drill chuck doesn't hit. One of the advantages of this shaper vise, because this jaw can float, does a pretty good job holding onto things that are wedge-shaped. I had a lot of trouble holding this part, but eventually a lot of light cuts got the job done. I did these other two pieces off camera. It's basically the same operations all over again. The machining on these didn't go as well as I would have hoped. I had a lot of trouble keeping things centered in the castings. You can see where I've done some filing to try to even it out a little bit. It's going to work. I think the lesson here is when I design these parts to have something to register off of for machining. All I had here was a little bit that had some flash on it. Really hard to get it straight that way. One other good, healthy design flaw, I made this piece tapered. It's fatter on this end than it is on this end. Looks really nice on the pattern, but it doesn't actually let it turn more than that. So speaking of poor design choices, I can't come up with a good way to hold this thing in a vise. It's tapered this way, the ends aren't square, there's even a little bump out right there. But If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know where this thing's going. I've got to say I don't actually use this vise all that much. Part of the reason is the mounting flange has basically been butchered off the thing. And I never got around to making proper hold downs for it because I don't use it very often. Which is part of the reason I don't use it very often. If nothing else, this project was a good excuse to finally get around to making these. That took a lot of fiddling around, but I think it's in there pretty well now. So now that I've got 3 good faces, I can go to the regular vise. The only other thing this one got that the others didn't is a 3/8 threaded hole for this tripod head. Other than that, pretty much the same operations again. All that's left to do now is to put it together and see if it works the way it's supposed to, which I did a little test fit already and I can tell I have some issues to work through, but I think we're going to save that for next time. So if you want to see that, stick around.